98.7 The Point is where you are. It's 8:16, and I love being able to do stuff like this because as a kid growing up, listening to the Guess Who, listening to Chilliwack, listening to Trooper, listening to Prism, and then getting to know these guys and the girls in the bands that I listened to and finding out more about them. It's kind of like me being like a fan, but not going googly over it, but just getting down and having a chance to talk to him. Al Harlow, how are you this morning?
Well, very well, and thanks for having us over.
Hey, anytime. Lisa's the one who put it together along with her friend Kevin. I don't know if Kevin's going to talk at all, but we have a mic just in case. Now, Prism. Well, that was not your first band. You actually started out a lot before that with some other stuff. What were you doing?
Yeah, well, I was always kind of a displaced mod in the psychedelic era of Vancouver, and I found some like-minded souls who were also looking like they just dropped out of Carnaby Street, the Seeds of Time from South Vancouver.
Yes.
I was from North Vancouver, and we kind of joined forces in there, and had a couple of regional hit records and stuff, and got in a lot of juvenile delinquent trouble, and had way too much fun, far too much, and it took us another decade to kind of get the business half of it together as Prism.
Well, and that's it, because you probably, like a lot of other kids that started playing, you just did it because you loved music. You didn't think about the money part of it or anything else. You just wanted to play.
Oh, absolutely. We had no clue. Yeah, that whole half of it was called the dream part.
Yeah. Yeah, you're living the dream, and all of a sudden, we got to worry about money now. Now, the music industry back then was horrific to you as performers and songwriters. And some of you made it through very well, and some didn't. A friend of mine, Jeff Neal, had just talked to him recently, just before Kenny Shields had passed, and he had finally helped get that band out of debt. After so many years, I think they finally bought their own catalog back, and that's the way it was for you guys. Did you go through something similar with your music?
In a sense, yes. It's almost like the old Hollywood movie system. You can make a feature film, in your backyard now, and in those days, there was no Pro Tools. There was nothing you could set up in your garage and do all that with. So you had to get a record contract, just like the Beatles had,
Yeah.
And of course, you were swimming in the shark tank at that point. And musicians are notoriously not businessmen. And there was a lot of ways to go wrong.
Yeah, there was. And that's the thing. And you said it right there. They're not businessmen. There's a few of you, like you look at the Jeff Neals, the Bernie Aubins, the Mark LaFrance, who are very, very business-minded, so they actually get things going and get you on track. And you being the artistic type, you want to write songs and play guitar and dance around on the stage with no shirt under your jacket and, the old Prism days, right?
That's exactly right. I'm trying to forget some of that, but yeah.
Hey, it was rock and roll back then. Now, you've... You grew up on the West Coast here, but you took a bit of a detour too. You went over to England for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, because that was kind of our mythical Shangri-La. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones and that whole scene. It was like a dream to us out here in the suburbs of Canada. And as you were touching on before. Nowadays, of course, Heart, BTO, Bryan Adams, Loverboy, people you can break out of Vancouver, or you could break out of Vancouver in the 80s, but once upon a time, we were a backwater. We might as well have been in the southern tip of New Zealand, So I went to London to check out, where the action was and where the music was. Yeah, that was my reaction.
Yeah, and there's a couple things here, because it's funny, and I've always been intrigued by this, because we were so fascinated with the Brits and what they were doing, and yet the Brits were so fascinated with the Americans and what they were doing, so it's kind of a mutual love affair, and they were both flying across the Atlantic just to see what each other was doing, and you ended up with this great thing called rock and roll.
Oh, you sure did, and Quincy Jones got it right. He said that those British kids, they did their homework. They were listening to Muddy Waters and B.B. King and that kind of stuff, and America had kind of forgotten its own music. That got swept aside, and of course the British invasion and the blues, London blues that followed, put it back on the map. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And then you touched on something else, and I've talked about to so many people about this over the years, about how the West Coast was, like you said, the most farthern part of New Zealand, and now you look at we've always had the talent here, but it was just never noticed.
Oh, people used to leave in order to get somewhere with their careers. Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Who else? Well, I guess everybody.
Well, the David Fosters, the Joni Mitchells,
Neil Young.
Neil Young, yeah, but then it started changing with the Guess Who, and slowly you saw the flows starting to happen.
Yeah, well, I was in the picture frame when Randy left the Guess Who and came out to Vancouver and grabbed our agent Bruce Allen and said, "You got to come into these big record company offices and speak for me. The artist cannot speak for himself." So he led Bruce by the hand, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Bruce Allen, you love him or hate him. There's some musicians who have had some not too good dealings with him. Some have had some amazing dealings. And I admire Bruce because he's a straight shooter. He just says it and does it and gets it done. And he's helped do a lot for the music in this part of the world.
Oh, absolutely. So he was Prison's manager. So I mean, we actually traveled.
Okay.
We actually traveled in the bus across America.
And I'm looking at Bruce because I just read Robinson and his amazing icon, and he was talking to Bruce, and I think Bruce first met Red back in Bill Haley and the Comets when they played, and I didn't think Bruce was that old, but he's getting up there in age.
Yes, he is. Yeah, I remember we celebrated Bruce's 35th birthday. We were in Nashville. We had a night off on a Prism tour, and that would have been 1978. Can we do the arithmetic now?
78, 30, so you had 40, so 70 something. There we go. So we're going to play some Prism in a bit, but I want to get this because you've been writing songs. Do you remember writing your first song?
Well, yeah. I'm of just the perfect age to have been under the influence of the Beatles, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and before that, I mean, my older sister had all the Elvis records and the Everly Brothers, and the songs just dropped out of the clouds. It was magic, and all of a sudden you had Lennon and McCartney, and it didn't take us 2 minutes to figure out that Bob Dylan wrote his own song. So I just assumed. I mean, when you're that young, you can't edit yourself. You can't monitor your own thoughts, and I just thought that writing songs was part of it. You pick up a guitar and you write songs.
And what was the first song you wrote? Do you remember? You've got to remember it.
It was called I Lost My Little Girl. And fortunately, I also lost the tape.
But, you know, you're going to think of that when you're leaving here today and you're driving back to your home, and you're going to think, oh, yeah, that chord structure, those lyrics. I might be able to come up with that song reworked. Isn't that the way it works
I remember
sometimes?
every note, yeah. And we did record some early stuff. We had a couple of Grundig tape recorders, and you could pull the wires off and you could do sound-on-sound stuff because you could jimmy the erase head and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and then take the tape off of this one and put it on that one. So we were multi-track recording in our basement.
And it's funny that you did that because you look at things now, and you mentioned Pro Tools earlier, and with digital recording now, you can do so much more. Back in the old days when you had a quarter-track tape or 8-track in your recording studio, punch editing, splicing, and it was just amazing with these producers and what they could do.
Oh, it was and we all became a kind of backyard experts in taking a razor blade and a piece of Scotch tape and splicing tape together. And the sound, as you say, when the 4-track machines came out, well then you put two of those machines together and you go back and forth and ping pong and lift the reels off of this one and put it on that one and punch out the 2 tracks in the middle, and now you got 8 tracks.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we're going to talk about one of your producers in just a little bit, an amazing man. But right now, we're going to play it was released just a while ago. The name of the song is Let It Go.
Yes, and Kevin is patiently sitting right beside me.
He can say something. He's allowed to talk, you know.
Yeah.
You might have to point that mic to him because there, he's allowed to talk. But Kevin, you've been around the music industry for a long time.
I have, yes.
And we were talking about it, the band 1-track playing at Gators and Club Soda and everything, and then all the other people you played with over the years.
Yeah. I started out with we were talking about Barney Bentall, and in the North Van connection. Actually, we started out in North Van as Brandon Wolf.
Yeah.
And that was my first one. Did Idolize, wrote Sandra Doesn't Live Here Anymore for Idolize, or with Tad.
Yeah, because Tad was down in Australia, and then Idolize had that Tokyo Rose song, and he actually moved back home for a while. What's Tad doing these days?
He is a really interesting guy. He just goes where the sun is warm. So he's back and forth to Mexico, and he's just living this bohemian lifestyle that I love. I don't have the courage to follow him in it, but
good for him.
He could be the next Henry Miller if he starts writing. His writing, and he's prolifically writing songs. He just laid like 100 songs on me that he's been writing in his van.
Yeah, and you know what? He should write a book on that.
He should.
Yeah.
He should. He's a fascinating guy. I mean, he was a hockey player when I
Yes.
started with him, and I was saying this is funny to say on radio. Last gig I ever did with Idolize was a fist fight on the dance floor in somewhere in Alberta, because that's how you resolve a conflict in hockey, and he just come out of hockey. So that was that's my last Idolize. Not that we didn't become great friends. We were always friends. 2 weeks later, we were friends. It just never happened that we played again together. But
and that's something too. We're going to play Al's song "Let It Go" again. So tell us a bit about this. You helped produce this one.
I did. What happened with this was I got called in to do a studio session. The song sounded really good. I'd just been playing with Lee Aaron, and Sean Kelly, the guitar player from Nelly Furtado and everything, was a friend of mine. So they called me back and said, "Will you come and play guitar on the track too?" I said, "I will, but I could get Sean." So Sean comes in, and they go, "Well, do you know anyone that could sing it?" And I go, "You should get Al Harlow to sing it." So this wasn't intended to be a solo Al Harlow or the first record or anything. It just kind of fell into place. And then, I was saying to Al, this sounds really good. We're doing a solo thing. We could jump the gun here. We got this song. We could, mix it, master it, and get it out while we continue to make the record. And we got Sean McGee from Abbey Road that did the Beatles Mono Masters to master it. So it's like quite the bunch of people on it. Ray Roper's on there singing Bee Gees. Dave Steele, is it?
Yeah.
Is on there too.
Yeah, Dave Steele, Army, the R&B All Stars. Yeah, and these are local guys, the West Coast musicians.
John Webster also.
Yeah,
played keys on "Living on a Prayer" among every Aerosmith that was done up there.
Yeah, and John played with Red Rider for a bit, and Tom Cochran and that. Yeah,
he's on Michael Bublé's new album too.
Yeah,
John is, and he mixed this.
He's the mixer of this song here.
Such a nice guy too.
Yeah, he's great.
Oh yeah.
Well, here's "Let It Go." This is newish Al Harlow, 98.7 The Point.
Well, I try to get enough sleep. That's where I failed dismally. But, take your vitamins, stay in shape. And when Prism goes out on the road these days, or when I have to go in the studio and sing or anything that we're doing, I just make sure that I try to swim or ride my mountain bike or play tennis every day. And it's cardiovascular. You got to keep the juices flowing.
Yeah, you do it because you look at another great singer from this area, Mark LaFrance, and he's the same. He's, in that age group, and he's still got an amazing voice.
Oh, he does indeed. And he was session singer to the Stars, as is Dave Steele. It's amazing.
Oh, Dave, and if you listen to Dave sings with the R&B All Stars a lot of the time now.
Yes.
But just an amazing vocalist.
Both those guys, just astounding. I mean, I'm at the back of the classroom when it comes to those guys.
Yeah, and you're not too shabby when it comes to singing. Now, you played with Prism. That was your second group. And how did you get involved with Prism?
Well, we were the old Seeds of Time alumni, but Lindsay Mitchell had quit the Seeds of Time or something. I can't remember. They were firing me every 5 minutes. So who knows? We were doing musical chairs, revolving doors. And he went across town and started playing with a band called Sunshine. And they were really eclectic. They had horns. I think Ross Barrett was on sax or something like that. Jim Valance was on drums. And so they were playing everything from Dixieland jazz to straight progressive jazz, and with R&B thrown in. And somehow, and back in those days, we were all doing this. Because there was no home recording capability, we were all trying to talk our way into local recording studios. And Bruce Fairburn, as we were talking earlier, he had a business head about him, and he was the trumpet player in the band. And he grabbed some studio time, and Jim Valance had some cool songs. And it was called Under Construction. There was no band. So everybody in town either played bass or drums or something on. There was about, I don't know how many, a dozen guys on this thing. But it was the 1 in a million shot that caught fire, and the record companies were fighting over it. And then we had to solidify. And Rocket Norton, the drummer, and I were roommates at that point. And I was across town doing studio stuff, the Al Harlow studio stuff at that time. And all of a sudden they said, gee, this thing's going to go. We better rally the troops. So we said, well, it's got to tour. It's got to be a real band. And in that, you got to be a band of brothers. You have to know how to travel together. Anybody can grab some fantastic musicians, but only, if you ask the Who and the Rolling Stones, they'll tell you, you got to learn how to live together. So that was Seeds of Time. The Seeds of Time with Ron Tabak singing was Prism.
Nice. But you said something there about the living together, and that is so hard because as musicians, you're together almost all the time, and there's got to be some god-awful stories, but some good stories in there, too.
Both, yes. God-awful good stories.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I mean, you look at what happened with the Eagles, right? But then they resolve their differences, they're back, and it happens to a lot of people. Everybody grows up and realizes it wasn't that bad.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, you lose your agendas as you get older. You remember the love, and that's what keeps us going now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why I'm getting nicer. Okay. So this song we're going to play next, I think almost everybody who has heard this song has either intentionally or unintentionally played air guitar to it. It's Spaceship Superstar.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
The story behind this is a Jim Vallance song.
Yeah, this is one of the first songs that Jim ever wrote, as he'll gladly attest, and it ended up being Prism's flagship song. I mean, it doesn't matter that you did 8 albums, every band is known for one flagship song, and then the 8 albums that are tucked underneath it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, gladly, I'll always go along with the fact that this is the undeniable anthem.
Yeah, well, the words in it, you wonder what Jim was thinking. I got a solar-powered laser beam guitar, and, it's just like, okay, he had either a really good dream or the mushrooms kicked in, I think.
Yeah, we'll have to get him on the phone.
Definitely. Now, this song here has got a cool story when it comes to space travel, too.
Well, yeah, like years after the fact, when the Space Shuttle Discovery was doing its last voyage before being stored in the Smithsonian Institute, so that would have been, 2012?
11, 12, somewhere in there,
11, 12. And they were picking the theme music. So on the last official day of the crew being up in space, they chose Spaceship Superstar as the work song for that day. And that was NASA's call. And so I thought, wow, that's great, because we toured the States a lot.
Yeah.
And for them to pick a Canadian band song as their official song was so cool.
Well, that is neat. And can you imagine being the song? Like, I don't know if they would have phoned Jim and says, "Hey, Jim, can we use your song?" Or would they have phoned the Prism, the guys who own the rights to this song, and say, "Hey, we want to use this"? How cool would that have been?
Well, once upon a time, you had to get permission, and now you just notify.
Oh, okay.
And so, actually, it was in the Dallas News, and it was on the NASA News board online. And a Prism fan contacted me and said, "Hey, are you aware of this?" It was like a day later. And I notified Jim Vallance. I broke the news to him. And he immediately got back and said, "Hey, we're on the charts on Mars."
I know. That is so funny. Here is Prism. This is Spaceship Superstar. And once you hear the first little bleep in here, it'll take you back to that time and place. Al Harlow's with us. Prism singer, songwriter, musician, 98.7 The Point. 98.7 The Point. That's Prism, Spaceship Superstar, bringing back loads of memories. It's 8:41. Al Harlow is here. You basically you are Prism now, except you've got some great guys working with you.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. They say, if you want to boil a frog in a pot of water, do it slowly, So Prism always had a lengthy cast of characters. There was a bit of a revolving door. There was the core band, and it took a long, long time. I mean, Lindsay Mitchell and I were the last 2 surviving originals, and then, Lindsay went off in a different direction. So I just kind of, by default, de facto, inherited, and the music lives on. And so, yeah, now I've got... as Keith Richards says, he says, "I suspect we're getting better at this thing." So,
yeah, I mean, I go automatically to Gary. Your drummer.
Yes, Gary Grace. He actually got the Roland Award, and this is no small potatoes, for Best Drummer in Canada 2010.
Wow.
And there's a long, long list of semifinals before you get there, and it attracts the heavyweights from coast to coast. And he goes to Europe and does clinics and does videos and all that kind of. And I say to him, "Why are you staying with me, man? We're just 3 chords and mashed potatoes." And he goes, "Oh no," he says, "I respect the music, and I'm with you." So what a killer musician.
But he's such a nice guy. But you think of drummers that Canada's got. I mean, Matt Fournette, Jerry Adolph,
yeah.
Mark LaFrance. I mean, these are guys that have a good meter, and they actually play the drums. They don't just sit there and they're scared they're going to break a skin. They actually hit the skins.
Like Rick Fedek and people.
Yeah, Rick too, yeah. Yeah, just amazing. And for you to have him, and then you've got your keyboard player, your bass player and that. And
yeah, Mark Gladstone on keys, and what a blessing. I mean, all the guys are just angels. They're real good. Tad Goddard on bass. And as we said earlier, it takes a certain kind of secret sauce to make a band.
It does.
And the rhythm section of that band with Tad and Gary, it's like as soon as those guys kick in, I can't get the smile off my face. It's like I've got a locomotive engine behind me, and then Mark and I just ride on top of that, man.
Well, it's funny because a friend of mine, Peggy Sue Moffat, myself, and I think her sisters were at one of your shows. And remember when there was that app that had the Zippo lighter for your iPhone?
Yes.
So we're sitting out in this audience, and you're playing the songs, and we've got our iPhones in the air with the lighters like that, and just enjoying it all. It brings back memories, but it also makes new memories and just gives you a smile.
It sure does. And yeah, and of course the music has it's like a keg of vintage wine for sure. But we deliver it fresh every day. People say to me, well, yeah, how can you sing Spaceship Superstar and these songs, Flying, Take Me Away, Young and Restless every night? And I say, every night you're reinterpreting. Every night you're imbuing the lyric with current memories. It's life, man. It's new to me.
You're right, because, music, there's two things that can take you back to that time and place immediately. One is a smell, like your mom making the apple pie, or your grandma making that, and all of a sudden, bang, you're back in her kitchen. The other one is the song. That chord will put you into the back seat of the 1972 Toyota Corolla with Susie, things like that. And that's the thing. And I mean, you bought Young and Restless, and you hear that, and as you singing it, I mean, you could be standing at attention with, Steve by your side, or maybe you've got Lisa on another night, or whatever like that, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's real to me. I think Van Morrison said he was asked the same question, and he says he rotates his set list, and if he can find new meaning for himself in lyrics that he wrote when he was a kid, then he'll sing that song.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to Prism because of the singers. The original one was Ron Tabak.
Sure was.
Just amazing. A Surrey boy. Nice guy. And he was the one-gloved guy before Michael Jackson, right?
Well, he sure was. And he was just a diamond in the rough, But people ask questions about Ron these days. What was he like and this kind of stuff. And as you say, he was a Surrey boy. He was a bit of a street fighter, with the heart of gold, big teddy bear. And he would buy, Christmas presents for his friends' kids. I mean, just an angel. And he talked like this. Yeah. And then it's time to sing, and you push the button, and out comes this
voice. Yeah,
amazing, angelic voice. And what can you say? You put him in front of a microphone, you got an album.
And that too on his stage presence, though, because he wasn't so flashy, but he just had it.
Oh yeah. Well, we our first big American tour, Meatloaf was just breaking out.
Yeah,
and we were on double bill. We were opening for Meatloaf for, it must have been a year, something like that. And at that time, Meat was the biggest thing in the business. Bad out of hell, that tour. And we were there for every show. As a matter of fact, when Michael Aday changed his name officially to M. Loaf, we were invited to the party. So we were good friends. Anyway, Meat mentored Ron.
Yeah.
Because Meat was a theater guy. He was a New York theater guy. And his band was a New York pit theater band. So there was this theatrical aspect to Meat. And so Meat took Ron aside and said, okay, you got to psych up before you walk out there. You got to take command before you've sung a note. And we were playing coliseums and arenas and huge gigs. And I watched it happen. I watched Ron as a student of Meat Loaf. And so it got to be a bit of a joke. We'd be in St. Louis or somewhere like that, and I'd hear Ron punching lockers in the dressing room, smashing chairs, and I'd look at my watch and go, oh, I guess it's time to go on.
That's funny. Oh, but and unfortunately we lost Ron, and I remember this so well because I had just started hanging out and working at CFOX, and I think the September or so before this, but around Christmas time in 1984.
Yes, that's true. And what a loss, because, excuse me, as you say, all bands had their ups and downs, and we had officially broken up and taken a hiatus, and then quickly realized the error of our ways. And it was still really close to the time too. It had only been a couple of years since we had all the the string of hits and so forth. So we came to our senses and said, well, let's put the original band back together again. It's only been a year or two, So we had made plans. We were going to take a little Christmas break in '84 and come January, and even Bruce Allen was back on board too with the whole team. We were going to do it all over again, and Ron was waiting for a condo to be renovated for him. He's moving into a new place. So he's going to spend Christmas with me. He's going to move in with me for a couple of weeks. And, it's funny how the timing goes. It's kind of like saying, could you have saved the Titanic from going down?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, And Ron was a very gentle soul. He was actually a church-going Christian and stuff. And he wanted to come over to my place. And we were actually going to sing hymns in my living room together. That was our plan. And I went to pick him up out in Surrey in my little MG sports car. And just, grab a suitcase and throw him the keys to my place and drive over to my place and spend Christmas. And anyway, he had a 10-speed bike. It had been snowing, like 2-day-old snow and slush. And he's got this bike. And I said, well, okay, Ron, we can strap that onto my luggage rack. He said, oh, no, I'm going to pedal to your place. I lived at Kitsilano Beach. And I said, really? I don't think so, man. Come on, let's go. And so we had a little friendly argument. Anyway, we strapped this bike onto the back of my little sports car, drove over the Patella Bridge. And he says, okay, let me off here. I'm going to do some visiting. And if I'd said no and stepped on the gas pedal, well, you can't go there. You can't say what might have happened. And I said, okay, Ron, if you're sure about this. And we undid the bike. I handed him the bike. And he gave me this little wink and hug and said, Merry Christmas. And I was the last one to see him. And that cycling trip turned into a fatal one. So that was a very sad day. He never showed up at my place. I waited for 2 days and then got the phone call.
Yeah, and you got it from his mom, right?
That's right. Yeah, Jean phoned me on Boxing Day morning. And it was one of those things where I could hear her voice trembling. And I don't know where it came from, but I said, he's gone, isn't he? And she said, yeah, he's gone.
Is his mom still around?
Yes, Jean is still around, bless her, and his two sisters too,
Nice.
Terry Lynn and Teresa, and they were all very peaceful about it. Again, they were all church-going folks, and they just said, there were a lot of mistakes made in the emergency ward. There was, if we wanted to get legalistic about this, we would have a case because they dropped the ball in treating Ron, and they just said, you know what, it was his time.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's play some. I'm going to play another Ron song right now because this is the one we touched on this earlier. We're going to play your new song in a moment or two, but this one, Young and Restless. Story behind that one.
Well, yeah, there is a story there. Well, at that time, Lindsay and I were feverishly writing the next album, which turned out to be Young and Restless, and this was the flagship song. And I was really happy with the way it turned out too. And we were tossing the little 4-track demo between my living room and Jim Valance gave us the bass line. He said, let me play bass on the demo. So he did. And there's that big, bass players love that song. Hey, Kevin, there's a big honking, walking bass line in the chorus. And even though that's me on the record, it was Jim's line. And, well, let's see, there's a couple of stories attached to that. But anyway, we took it down to L.A. We used to mix and finish our records up down in L.A. And correct me if I'm missing one of the stories attached to this thing, but we were pretty tight with Val Jarre, the producer of Poco, and Linda Ronstadt and the Eagles and that whole community. And one night, Jackson Browne walked into our mix sessions and says, wow, what a great song, man. Can I help? We said, yeah, man, come on in. And we spent like 2 nights, 10 fingers on the console, just pulling faders and mixing the song. So Jackson Browne actually does the fade out at the end, and we're all grabbing faders and kicking the vocal up. And it was sometimes people say, oh, songs take you back to your youth. And that song takes me back to the studio. And so I've got my own personal happy memories of that one.
Well, here's Young and Restless. This is Prism, 98.7 The Point. 98.7 The Point. That's Prism. We're Young and Restless. Al Harlow's here. I guess you are Prism, and you've got your musicians helping you, but you carried on the namesake, and you still do. How many shows do you do a year?
We do about 40 shows a year, yeah.
So about one a weekend. You do it. Do you feel like, if I'm stuck at home too much, I feel the need to get on the road and do something. Right. Do you get that way too? Do you get restless?
Oh, absolutely so. Oh, yeah. I mean, and that kind of touring, it either cures you or kills you. It makes you stronger and healthier. So you either thrive on it or you just don't want to know. And so those of us who are still doing it, I mean, we got it down to a system. You can, you stay healthy and you just appreciate those 90 minutes on stage, man. It makes it all worthwhile. Yeah,
and that's the other thing, too, is you said healthy there, because the old days is like you'd go for a cheeseburger or a bowl of ketchup soup. But nowadays, you actually eat healthier and you go to the gym because almost every hotel you stay at's got a gym. So it's a whole different dog now, isn't it?
Oh, I take my swimming trunks and hit the pool.
Yeah. Now, Young and Restless, every time I had heard that title, I always thought of the soap opera, but it turns out there is a bit of a tie-in on that.
Well, yes, there are. And for those who had the album of the namesake, there's another song in there called Another World. And so Lindsay and I would get together at 11 o'clock in the morning, and Young and Restless was on the TV, so it's actually true.
Wow. And you said Valance got the bass line in that, and the lyrics themselves, do you remember how they came about? Was it just from, because I always think of high school.
Yes.
And the strict teacher, and you're lined up along the lockers, and that's where it puts me. And I don't know what your view was when you were writing that.
Well, you just nailed it. And initially, I excuse me, I think Lindsay had kind of a country flavor to it, and the chorus was like, 1 time lucky, 2 times down, 3 times something, and this guy. And I thought, no, you can't. That's a bit of a list. And so, anyway, I glanced over at the screen and started going, Young and Restless. And he said, all right, okay, we got it. And then a lot of the song, sometimes the song can flow out of a good title. Sometimes it's title first, or you get some verses, and then that suggests the title. So it was a bit of a 50-50 thing. Once we had the title, then okay, well, there it goes. I guess break out of high school. Like, let's stretch our legs here. Let's be like the big boys,
Nice. Now, do you sleep with a recording device by your bed?
Well, yeah, actually, yes. My iPhone is always on, and there have been a few where you wake up and you go mumble, and shut, and then in the morning you got something.
Nice. Now, with your songwriting, is there a particular format you had for writing songs with Lindsay or with Valance or with Bruce Fairburn? Was there a particular format, or did you guys just meet and write?
It was really more the meet and write. After the fact, when we did kind of our second wave, a lot of the bands, did that. We kind of regrouped after a little break and stuff. And then Brian and Jim and I wrote a couple of songs together. And and I always had Jim Valance come and guest lecture my songwriting classes at Capilano College. I was there, and he came at least once a year for 28 years. Like, what a soldier, what a sweetheart. And he would always get asked the question: is it lyrics first, and who writes the music? And in the case of our little group, Lindsay, Brian, Jim, and myself, we're all fairly adept at both, and we could fill in each other's blanks. So, it wasn't like Bernie Taupin and Elton John, where you write the music and I'll write the lyrics. It wasn't like that. We could all pinch hit for each other. So that can make for a happy occurrence.
See, and I always thought this was interesting, a songwriting class. Now, if you listen to music, there is a structure because it's got to go this way.
Yeah.
You've got to get the hooks in there. You've got to do this. Unless, of course, it's jazz and it's like throw everything out the window and play. But I've always been intrigued by a songwriting class. What do you learn?
Well, in those days, there was no rock school videos and stuff. I was asked to come in and guest lecture back when we were first having hits. And then the head of the music department said, would you be interested in doing a class like this? And it was unknown. I had never heard of that kind of stuff. And I thought about it for a minute and said, I mean, I didn't have to do it. And I thought, well, what a cool thing to do, to have some enthusiastic young people in there. So that wasn't allowed to be like music theory or composition, not that kind of stuff that you take in conservatory. It had to be pop hit type writing. And I said, yeah, you got it. And we were talking, as you say, about hooks and choruses and big lines and lyrics that grab people where they live and that kind of stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I developed it from scratch in those days.
Yeah, and any success stories that came out of that, or are there too many people going through to remember?
Yeah, well, there were a number of them now. Let's see, who is that?
How about Melanie Decker?
Melanie Decker was one. She's still putting out records.
Country, I think.
Country rock.
Or Americana, kind of.
Yeah, that would be more.
Yeah, and there was another lady, too, who was rivaling Joni Mitchell there for a while, who was one of my students. It was so funny. I was in... And I would teach the music business, too, what a good contract looks like. I was at Much Music doing an interview in Toronto a little after that time. And there was a guy up in the booth, way up in the control booth with a microphone, working the lights and the sound and all that kind of stuff. And I heard this huge, one of those voice of God things, "Hey, Al," over the PA. And I looked up, and here's this guy waving. What do I know? I've had hundreds of students. I'm waving back. And he comes back and says, "Al, look at me. I did everything you told me to. Look where I am now." And I said, "Really?" I said, what did I tell you to do? Can you get me a job here?
That's amazing. But when did you discover, because we talked about it earlier, and you being a songwriter and a guitar player, did you always have a business sense?
Well, no, that kind of came a bit later. I mean, initially we had Bruce Allen. But then you learn, you sign some bad contracts. And when I went over to prison from what I was doing, Bruce Fairburn and Bruce Allen, they had to bail me out of some bad contracts. They had to unsign some stuff. And I was actually rescued from some real legal misery. And it was just because I was young and naive, Yeah.
And it's nice that you learn it. Like, we've got many friends now that have learned there is a good business side to this music thing. But I want to touch on this one guy, Bruce Fairburn. How incredibly lucky were we to have him here on the coast.
Oh, what a story. Yeah, and we really miss him. If he was around now, he would be doing something incredible. And yeah, he was just a UBC student. As he said, he looked like a rocket scientist. He didn't look like a rock and roll guy. And he just had a very intelligent, calm way of looking at the situation around him. He could talk to record company executives and talk to musicians and just golden ears. And we were all, at that particular time, we were all learning together. And, excuse me, as I say, I was across town doing my own album, or so I thought, and we're reviving that now as an archival historic piece. But he would listen to my tapes and say, "Okay, how did you get that sound? What is that? Is that a bell tree? Is that two Hammond organs in stereo? What is that?" So, I have bragging rights to say that I actually said, "Okay, Bruce, here's how we did that." And he would just lock in. And then, of course, he was doing that all around town. He was just learning from everybody and everything. And he started learning from the best after that. And then, as you know, he went on to produce Aerosmith and Bon Jovi, and the rest is history.
Well, and I firmly believe that he is a big part of why we were put on the map here on the West Coast for musicians and bands, because of him. Little Mountain Sound. I mean, then you've got Bob Rock as well, and Fraser, and all those other people in there that just amazing talents.
Yes, amazing. And as you say, Bruce got to a point in his career, excuse me, so post-Prism, post-Loverboy, he was signing his own production deals with Atlantic Records and people like that. And he got to the point where he said, "Well, why should I hop on a plane and travel to all these studios in New York and LA and London?" And he said, "Well, come to me." And Little Mountain Sound became the world-famous go-to studio, so that Bruce could go home and sleep in his own bed every night.
Yeah, and Little Mountain is around it's sort of a skeleton of what it used to be, but it's still there.
Studio B has been preserved and restored and updated.
Yeah.
And, I walked in there a couple of years ago to do something. I couldn't believe it. Like, this place is still here.
Yeah.
Studio A is gone. So we did Armageddon we had the Vancouver Symphony assemble in Studio A. That room is no longer. But Studio B is where we would do the small band stuff, the overdubs and stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, my Harlow band went in. I think we won a talent contest at the Commodore or something. And you get free studio time. And we were actually doing the midnight to 7 in the morning, piggybacking Bachman Turner Overdrive. We're doing Not Fragile, and we were on their drum setup and on the way they had the console set up. So we walked in and sounded great because we were on Randy's sound.
Yeah.
So we'd walk in at midnight and record all. So that was Studio B. All the bands did their stuff. Paul Jans, everybody, Loverboy, we all did Studio B.
Yeah, and you talked the midnight to 7 thing, and I go back to all of a sudden Little Mushroom.
Oh, yes.
Midnight. How many times have you been there overnight and you're just sitting there listening to a friend get recorded, and you just, it's just amazing electricity and amazing talent here.
Mushroom was magic. And I'd take a sleeping bag and a pizza and just, camp there. And, I'm sure there are books to be written about just the studios.
Yeah, exactly. And, Baker Street up in North Van there when Paul Baker was around, just a little dive, but just a great sound out of there.
It's still there, and the sign is still on the door, and I say a little prayer every time I drive by. Paul Baker, another pioneer, sadly missed.
Yeah, my parents had a fireplace store right across the street from that. When Paul moved in that day, I looked, Paul, what are you doing here? He says, well, I'm opening a studio up. So that was kind of cool, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to your solo stuff now. My Mind is Running is your latest song. This is the worldwide debut right here. What's the story behind this song?
Well, we are debuting it right here, this moment. Well, I've got the composer of the song, the writer, Kevin Stuart Swain, is sitting right beside me, and I just feel privileged because, I think there was a time, Jim Valance said this, he said, when we were young, we didn't know where all this stuff was going to go. I mean, we didn't know if next week we were going into the upper stratosphere of, Elton John territory. So when you're young and your blood's pumping and the adrenaline's pumping, you kind of have agendas. Your songs are like your little babies, and you're very protective, I hear it this way, do as I say, you play this, you play that. And that's the way we all were, and we can joke about it now. But then you get to a point where you let go, and as Kevin said earlier, I was called in to what turned out to be the Al Harlow solo album project, and the revitalizing of Al Harlow, just as a vocalist, because the song that we played earlier, "Let It Go," I did not write that. Devin Rice wrote that. Yeah. And anyway, Kevin, we're doing a whole album's worth of stuff, and a lot of it is mine and co-writes. But Kevin came up with this killer song, and I'm just happy to be the vocalist on this. And so, Kevin, how did you come up with this?
Yeah, what's the story behind the song?
Well, and before I start, I just want to shout out to Scott Young at Alchemy Studios, who drummed, produced, and engineered this tune.
Yes, Scott, our hero.
We got an Alchemy story in a minute. Though,
yeah. Anyway, hi to him. I don't know. I've been working around this tune for a few years. And I just decided to get positive with it, make it a real unbridled early love song. And I don't know what to say about it. It's just I've been writing tunes for a long time, and this is one of them, and Al likes it.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
I mean, there's no real great story to it.
Well, I could hear you. You were, in our downtime in the studio, you'd be noodling away on these great, big, blocky chords, and then next week it would be different. Now what are you doing?
Well, there's some interesting chord structure things that happen on that tune, but it gets a bit musical. But the verse kind of just keeps modulating all over the place, and I'm just trying to pay it off with a big power chorus and sing about love.
Love. Yeah, we all need it. Here's Al Harlow. New music, the worldwide debut. My Mind is Running. 98.7, The Point. The worldwide debut premiere of Al Harlow, My Mind is Running. Is it running away from you, or My Mind is Running, Kevin?
Yeah, My Mind is Running away with you.
Okay, because my computer cut it off. And, modern technology. Very cool. And that's you playing guitar in there, Al?
Yeah, well, that's our team. And Scott Young is on drums, and he's also the engineer and the producer. I mean, this guy is multifaceted, one of those magic guys, and he owns a studio too.
Yeah,
Alchemy Sound.
Alchemy Sound. We're going to talk about that in a sec, but I want to go back to the disconnect between playing guitars and singing. Like, I always look at drummers, and I'm amazed at how they can sing and play the drum. But then you get somebody that's doing a lead like that, and you're singing as well. How do you do that?
Well, once upon a time when we were kids, I always thought. I was stuck with being this North Van, baby Mick Jagger. I had the moves, I could play the harmonica and stuff. And then I'd switch over to guitar. Man, it suddenly occurred to me, no, wait a minute, Chuck Berry does both, Yeah. And then with my generation, I befriended Sammy Hagar. He was a friend of our producers.
I love Sammy.
Yeah, and we got chummy when we were making the Small Change record. He'd come in every night because he was best friends with our producer, Carter. And so, Sammy's a guy, Peter Frampton's another guy. You can do both. Now, you have to have your mind in two spots. I mean, it's one thing to be a chunky rhythm player, and then you step back from the mic, and now it's time for the guitar player to step in. Well, that's still you.
Yeah, and it amazes me because, I have trouble walking down the street and chewing gum at the same time, but to watch you or a drummer sing and play and do it good, that's just an amazing feat.
Well, the thing is, I need to have a minder up there. I have to have a guitar tech to rescue me, because sometimes I just close my eyes and think, if I was just the guitar player, I could stand over to one side and just be cool and just, be very studious about it. But when you're doing somersaults and, you're all running around like a monkey on a stick, you have to keep that part of your brain focused on the fingers, so it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Now, back to Scott at Alchemy Sound. He's a guy that likes to give back. I mean, you can tell he's a music fan because he does so much for the industry, right?
Oh, absolutely. He's a champion, man. He helps young musicians and, has a lot of young bands in his studio as well, right?
Yeah. And I saw him running around the night of the Battle of the Bands when Lisa was here. We were over at Donegal's that night, and Scott was there, and he was one of the sponsors, Lisa.
That's right. He helped out. He was one of the judges and supplied the drum kit.
And supplied the drum kit, yes, the drum kit. But he actually gave away some studio time for the winning band.
Actually, gave two bands.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they were so great.
Yeah, and the winning band was, what were they called?
Hastings.
Hastings, yes. And then the other guys that came up were the Elevators? Or
The Getovators.
The Getovators, the Getovators, yeah.
Which are my new favorite band.
Mine too.
And we're going to be playing one of the bands here for sure. We'll probably play both, but definitely Hastings, and then we'll be playing them when Scott gets through recording them. And who's mastering those? You, Kevin?
Probably Brock McFarland, who's another guy out of Mushroom that we were talking about. He mastered the My Mind's Running Away With You as well. Scott actually does pretty decent mastering too, but it's nice to separate those two things because you get, to have that, other view of the tune. So.
And it's so cool to have somebody that has a recording studio now, as opposed to going into some guy's basement and hanging blankets on the wall and recording that way. Yeah, like how many times have you done that, Al?
Oh my goodness, yes. How many egg cartons do you have to tack onto the wall to get it soundproofed?
Yeah, that's our time is coming to an end pretty quick. Al Harlow has been here with Prism. And we could probably do another 5 hours on the stories you have and the songs and everything else. Prism, as a kid growing up, and I go back to this CanCon thing. In Canadian radio, we've got to play so much Canadian music. It's mandated by the governing body. And I wonder if, in fact, you would have had a chance as Prism to do what you've done without that. I mean, it was great music. You put it up against any other song at that time. But yet we were just the Canadians, and who cared about the Canadians kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a mixed blessing, and lots has been talked and written about it. In our particular case, I know the answer to that question because Prism actually charted in Billboard in the States before we boomeranged back into Canada.
Wow.
So I think Spaceship Superstar, Take Me to the Captain, and It's Over were all Billboard bulleted songs, and then we came into a lot of people thought we were American at first.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So we actually didn't do the CanCon benefit initially. I guess as time rolled on, every Canadian musician has benefited from that. But then again, you go back down to the States and they say, "Oh well, you Canadians, you got this legislated success. It's unproven." I've heard of that too. Again, it didn't affect us, but I've heard that was a kind of an American reaction to the Canadian content.
That's cool. It's Over. That just took me back. I mean, I think there was two heartbreak songs. It's Over was one of them by you guys, and the other one was Streetheart. What kind of love is this?
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to be singing that, swaying back and forth on stage on August 29th in Winnipeg. That's the big encore ending for the tribute to Kenny Shields.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Streetheart. You look at Kenny Shields. Unfortunately, we lost him just a very short time ago, and Jeff Neal will be coming in here when the dust settles, and we'll do kind of a Kenny love-in and talk about him and play some Streetheart in that. But he was one of my favorite singers. And there's something about the voices, like, from the Small Faces to the Streethearts, that kind of thing. 30 Years in the Hole, Humble Pie, all that sound. That's the kind of voice. And I think that's why I was sort of pulled towards Prism, because of the same kind of idea, that kind of voice.
Oh, that's exactly right. And like Mike Reno, there's another one, But yeah, Kenny had that identifiable $1 million, 1 in a million voice, and a great big heart, and he was the world's nicest guy, so he could deliver the soul and the spirit and the voice all in one package. And of course he's dearly missed, and we're grateful that we have the recordings.
Yeah, definitely. And the 29th of August, it's in Winnipeg. It was Streetheart was supposed to play, and now the organizers of that festival could have just said, well, no, Kenny's not here, so Streetheart's off. But what they've done is they've turned it around, and the who's who in music is going to be there pretty much.
Yeah, all of our friends will be there. So
yeah,
I'm gonna head over there too.
You mean you got you've got Jeff Neal, you've got Spider, you've got the Loverboy guys. There's just so many of them that because he was just so well respected and just such a great artist.
That's exactly right, and this is our way of paying tribute.
Yeah, and like you said, we've always got the songs. So that's coming up the 29th in Winnipeg, and it's going to be good. They've got some other bands that are on there, but I think that'll be the highlight of the day.
It certainly will.
So we're going to play one more song. If you had a choice to play a Prism song, and I've only got 2 loaded here because I didn't go too crazy, because I could probably play Prism for about 5 days straight. Flying, Take Me Away, or Free Will, those 3 songs. So if you were to pick one of those ones, which would you pick?
Oh, help, this is not fair.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote Flying and Take Me Away, so there's that whole personal aspect.
Okay, we've narrowed it down to those 2 then.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to pick one of those, which was the first one you wrote?
Well, I wrote Take Me Away first, but I have this vivid photographic memory in my mind of sitting at my kitchen table with a pencil and a pad and scratching out the lyrics, the various attempts and crossing words out to Flying. And there's a story behind Flying. That was a real girl, and I did put her on an airplane. And anyway, my next snapshot is us. I think we were playing Texas A&E or something to like 18,000 people a few months later. And as far as I could see, they're swaying back and forth with their Bic lighters, and they're singing the words that I was scratching out at my kitchen table, 8 months before. And I looked around and I thought, really? Is this what it's like? Am I actually here? Is this real?
That's so, it's got to be surreal, right? It's just, you look at that and it's like, wow. Do you ever get over that?
I don't think you do. I think you're always tickled that, your music is intended to be listened to and to reach a wide audience, as we were blessed enough to have done. That was the name of the game, wasn't it? So those moments are crystallized for that song. So yeah, that's my Flying moment.
Well, I guess we've got to do both of them anyways. We're going to start it out with Flying. This is Al Harlow from Prism. It's on 98.7 The Point. 98.7 The Point. That's Prism and Flying. Memories, and more memories. And that's what music's about. I mean, you take you back that time and place, or you make some new memories. Al Harlow is here. Prism, and when's your guys' next show, Al?
Prism is in Red Deer this week on the 18th. What is that, Friday?
Yeah.
Saturday, we're at the 7th Annual Edmonton Rock Festival, which is a big outdoor one. And then the next day, Sunday the 20th, we're doing the big Ambleside West Van Festival. And
that, you look at that, like Nick Gilder is supposed to come in here one day, and I've always been a fan of Nick. And I've always been sad for Nick at the same time because of the day when he opened up for the Cars. And they booed him off stage, his hometown crowd. It's like, and my heart breaks all the time about that.
That was
yeah. And it's just, you just look at it, it's like, But I'm sure Nick has got some amazing stories, everything from Sweeney Todd to what he's doing now.
Yeah. And major songwriter too. Film soundtrack stuff for Pat Benatar, Hot Child in the City, great solo career.
Oh, that Hot Child in the City, the bass line on that one too.
Oh, so that's a great song. And Barry Samuels, our friend that was behind all that management-wise. Good friend.
Yeah, another hero from Vancouver.
Yeah. Good, actually, and still out there. Like he phones me a couple times a week supporting stuff. He's a great guy.
Yeah, and we talk about the music, the talent here, but then we forget about the agencies. I mean, the Sam Feldmans, the Bruce Allens, and the other people that got their start, even through them. But just some amazing people here. Casey from Bowser Moon, I don't know if he's still doing stuff or not, but
he's booking Asia.
Yeah, that's it's just amazing from that side of it. Now, okay, we're going to play the one more song, and you wrote this one here, Al. Take Me Away.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and that was I was in a hotel in Red Deer with my own band, and we're struggling away. We're trying to get somewhere, and it was right around the same time that the Prism album was just starting to take off, and I was in some sort of black and chrome sleazy rock club in the hotel room upstairs. One of those things where you don't want to take your shoes off, you know. And I looked out the window and I just thought, take me away.
Yeah. And it came about that simple.
Oh yeah. So some of the ones, as Pete Townsend said, you know, there are the songs that you just labor and slave over, and it takes you months and months, maybe even a year, just to tweak it just right so you hear what's in your head, right? And then there are the what I call the freebies that just fall in your lap and take me away. It took me about how long is it? 3 minutes? So that's how long it took me to write it.
It's funny because I have a friend that has one song. It's just an amazing song, and he's never happy with it. He's re-recorded and reworked it so many times, and I still like the first version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he's not happy with it.
You know, I wanted to say, too, with Al, so they did the first record. Jim Vallance was the cornerstone of the whole thing. Well, he left, and this band could have fallen apart. They bring Al in, second album. He writes "Take Me Away Flying," "Nickels and Dimes," and spearheads like "Saves Prism," like all the hits off that second album are him.
It's amazing, and you've got your whole life to write your first album.
That's right.
And then you've got to write the second album
in 8 months.
In 8 months, and it's like, how do you do it
without your principal writer?
Yeah. And then we used to say, and then there's the third album, which and that is the litmus test. You know, you're like, okay, you've survived this far. Now you have to be great. You have to really hold up the front end of the boat on the third one. You know?
And that's the difference, because you look at country and you look at rock and roll. Rock and roll, it always seems to be that you've got to write your own music, and this is why it's so tough for rock and roll. But country, take a Garth Brooks. Okay, he'll get a songwriting credit because he wanted to rework the song and get some royalties from it, but he didn't write the songs. So it's so much easier being a country artist to do it than it is a rock and roll thing. And what is it? I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a rock artist and covering a song, but you guys and girls seem to think you have to write your own music.
Yeah, and again, that was because we were the Lennon, McCartney, Dylan generation. And now I think there's a little more license there that, now I'm going to just throw my own view on the table here, that if you're going to do, I almost hate the word cover, but if you're going to do somebody else's song, especially make a record of it, you know, bring something to it, you know, just make it so obviously a different interpretation, and then that's just as valid, you know. Then you're a song interpreter, a stylist, you know, and that's a valid art too. Like Elvis never wrote anything, Frank Sinatra never wrote anything, but my goodness, aren't we grateful that they did what they did? So that's another art, you know, interpretation.
Yeah, and performance and that X factor, because X factor goes a long way when it comes to being a performer. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when I was judging some of the Vancouver Seeds and Spotlight 86 stuff, we had that little box there, the X Factor. What makes you want to watch this person perform or this band perform?
Wow.
Yeah.
And you need that.
Yeah.
Because you can be the best singer and songwriter in the world, but if you're up there and you're just sitting in a corner doing nothing, it's like no one wants to watch you.
No, you have to communicate. You know,
Yeah.
Your heart has to come out of that microphone somehow and make people want to listen. And when people think that you're actually singing right to them.
Yeah, and that's it. It touches you. And I'm just going to, I keep saying I got to get out of here because we all got things to do, but one last little thing here. When you started out touring, as opposed to touring now. Of course, things are a little better, the equipment's a little different, but do you tour now and make better money, or was it better money back then when you were touring? How did that work?
Well, yeah, back in the days when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was a lot of money on the table, and the expenses, excuse me, and again, we were talking earlier about record companies and that whole mega industry, which no longer exists.
Yes, thank God.
So, yeah, and I mean, I guess the good news is that everybody can make, you know, great sounding albums in their basement. The bad news is that there's 10,000 albums a week coming out, and how do you get through it all? So there's no mass audience anymore. You might be listening to your favorite thing, and you can say, hey, listen to this, and I might bring 5 things, and so we're all, you know, it's a very splintered audience. There's no such thing as mainstream anymore. But now we're doing it smarter, you know, just as hard but smarter. And so I remember having like 5 semi-trailers out on the road. You know, we had a crew of like 30 guys. Well, now, going across Canada, at least, there's all these local production companies. Sound and Lights are all there. They've all got our line list and the back line, the Marshall amplifiers and the drums. Every one of these companies across Canada, right from here to Newfoundland, they know exactly what kind of drums that Prism and Loverboy and Street Heart use, and they supply all the gear. We show up with our personal gear, and it's a big rock show.
Nice. What kind of guitar do you play?
Oh, don't get me started here. Well, I collect Gibson Firebirds. It's a rather eclectic model, and
You went Bachman with your Gibsons.
oh yeah, and now I'm dating myself, but in the early days of the youthful Rolling Stones, when they were busy pioneering what they did, Brian Jones, and Lord rest him, he's no longer with us, but the blonde-haired, angelic-looking, mischievous rhythm guitar player had that teardrop-shaped white Vox guitar, and Vox only made a few of them. He had a prototype, and then those guitars just disappeared. And they came out, there were cheap versions later with too much hardware on them. They looked kind of junky. Anyway, Vox did a little reissue at the end of the 90s, and I was looking for 20 years, and I found one.
Nice.
And it was in a pawn shop in South Los Angeles, and I phoned the guy, and I said, "You've got my guitar." We talked for a few minutes, and he says, "All right, you got it." And he put it in the back room, and I had it picked up in his pawn shop.
The drummer from Ultravox.
Yeah.
Went and got the guitar. And it's in the new video. So when the video comes out tomorrow, all these guitars he's talking about are in the video.
Nice. Do you still have your first guitar?
Oh, I wish. Oh, help. Don't you wish you had your first car and your first guitar?
And your first car, 1968 Nova.
Yeah, precisely. We've led parallel lives, my friend. So I wish I could say yes. And my dad was great. He was very supportive, and he actually said to me, well, it wasn't my first guitar, but he says, "Well, son, if you're going to take this music thing seriously, then you have to have a Gibson." I said, "Okay, Dad." And I was so young, I didn't even know what that meant, Whatever the Beatles were playing, I wanted that.
Yeah.
And anyway, the Rolling Stones came on television. I think it was Shindig on a Thursday night. And Keith and Brian both had matching Firebirds, these reverse-looking things. And I looked, and I could just see that it had the Gibson logo. And I said, "Dad, that's a Gibson." and my dear old dad, in those days, it was no Long and McQuaid. These guitar stores didn't exist. You had to order one in to this little delivery depot. And bless his heart, my dad said, "All right, you got it." And we ordered, and I had, if not the first Gibson Firebird in Vancouver.
So what did your parents like? What did your dad do for work? Was he a musician, or what did he do?
Well, I love my dad, and he loved me, and he was a man of very few words. I knew he was proud of me, but he was, for his occupation, his profession, as I knew it, he was a master printer, like a lithographer.
Yeah.
That's what he did. It wasn't until my dear old dad passed away and all my old aunts and uncles came in and said, "Well, don't you know that your dad was once a star musician?" I said, "What? He never told me." And I think he was trying to protect me from a life of excess on the road. Well, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, right? But there was an actual recording star in the 30s and 40s, a guy named King Gannon. Now, is that a cool name? King Gannon. And my dad was his guitar and fiddle player. And they made records, and in those days you did a lot of live radio.
Yeah.
And I looked him up I Googled him. And yeah, there was this guy, and my dad was in his band, and they toured and they made records, and my dad never told me.
Wow. That's sad, but it's cool at the same time.
It was cool, yeah. And I found out that when Prism was off doing the big tours, my dad would go over to my place and water my plants. And he'd bring his buddies from work, and all my platinum albums are on the wall, So my old man would sit there and go, "It's my son."
Nice. And your mom?
And Mom was the same. She played piano and sang in the choir and did all that. So, I had the support of parents for sure. And isn't that wonderful that you can say that?
You've got to do it. I've got a 10-year-old, and his things change from day to day, week to week sometimes. But you want to let them get out there and experience it. There's enough of saying no, you can't do that. I mean, he's not a jerk when it comes to trying things. It's all within control and all within reason. And if you commit to it, you commit to it, right? And but there's just you got to do that with people. Let them follow a little bit of a dream, at least for a little while.
That's right. Support their dreams.
Yeah. Well, this is it. You've been here probably longer than you wanted to be here, but
no, it's all good.
Yeah, good.
Privilege.
Take Me Away. This is a song that you wrote in about 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Sure
and
did.
we're going to play all 3 minutes and 15 seconds right now. Thank you so much, Al Harlow. Kevin Swain, thanks for being here. This is Prism 98.7 The Point.